y ahora el pueblo que se alza en la lucha con voces gigantes gritando adelante. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Co-op Bookstore, owned and operated by the largest and most powerful and not always most organized organization in the world, the people. And that's one of the things we're here to talk about tonight. And the fact that it is an ongoing struggle that never seems to result in that place we're going to on the horizon is something that the Co-op Bookstore knows a little bit about too, but not as much, I don't think, as the authors of our book. I'd like to welcome all of you, but especially Richard Roman, one of our authors here tonight, for the Vancouver launch for Continental Crucible, Big Business, Workers and Unions in the Transformation of North America. And I understand that there is a program rather than the usual reading from chapter 7, section 2 of the book that we like to do so much here. You're going to be introducing a couple of panelists and there's going to be a bit of a discussion.
My thanks to the People's Co-op Bookstore for allowing us this space, and to our two distinguished speakers, Jim Sinclair and Napoleón Gómez. I'll say a few words about it in a moment. But I'm going to make some introductory remarks, and then the two speakers will speak. I'll make some comments, and then we'll open it up to the audience. This book started about 21 years ago, really not this book, another book, when I met Edur Velasco, Arregui in Toronto, at a conference about NAFTA, which was about to be imposed on all three countries. And Edur, who is a university professor and trade union activist in Mexico at UAM, Edur and I really were talking about how little Canadian and U.S. Unionists and social movement activists know about Mexico and its very how to put it, unusual labor relations and union system. We thought we'd write a quick book on Mexican unions and the industrial relations system. Well, that quick book grew and grew and grew and has never been completed. Hopefully it'll be completed in this lifetime. But this book was a spin-off of that book. And it was a spin-off because the idea for this book, especially part one about the corporate offensive, came about when I gave a few talks in California about 10 years ago, and to very knowledgeable audiences, left academic and one left activist. And in both cases, they weren't really familiar with the most powerful organizations in each of the three countries. The Business Roundtable in the U.S., the Business Council on National Issues, now the Canadian Council of Chief Executives in Canada, and the Council of Mexican Businessmen in Mexico. And I was really shocked at how little was known about the most powerful agents of promoting not only the neoliberal offensive, but the trade agreements. And the neoliberal offensive and the trade agreements were being treated as if they were ideas that just came from the heads of economists or from the heads of politicians, rather than there being a systematic organization of the capitalist class in each of the countries to carry out project to change common sense and to impose its offensive. The book is about other things too, and I'll talk more about that later. But that's how this book came about, incorporating some of the elements from the still unfinished book about the Mexican labor movement. So anyway, with no further ado, comments on my part for now, I'd like to say a few things about the speakers before introducing them. Jim Sinclair is the former president of the BC Federation of Labor. and before that of the Fishermen's Union. And he's a longtime activist and advocate in international solidarity, especially with Latin America. He's, in fact, Jim and I just discovered through our exchanges about this meeting that we were both around the same group in Toronto in the 70s, the Latin American Working Group, which played a very important role around solidarity and anti-imperialist efforts. Our other speaker is Napoleón Gómez, who is a very important labor leader in Mexico, and well worth reading his book on his experiences, because you'll learn how amazingly repressive the Mexican system is, and how amazingly courageous the leaders of the miners' union, including Napoleon and his wife Aurelia, have been in standing up to this. And of course, how courageous the rank and file miners have been in their struggles against tremendous odds, tremendous brutality, tremendous state violence and company violence. And as probably most of you know, Napoleon is now, and Aurelia are now Vancouverites, or at least temporarily, till things change in Mexico. Not temporarily. Hopefully temporarily, when the transformation in Mexico happens. They were forced out of Mexico by incredible legal harassment, threat of long-term imprisonment without any charges that have been reinstituted and thrown out by the courts again and again and again and again, as well as death threats to themselves and their families. And so they live in exile in Canada, and Napoleon carries on union work from Vancouver. A very unusual situation, but a very interesting one, and also an example of international solidarity, because Napoleon has been given a lot of support and help by unionists, especially the steelworkers, I believe. So it's really an honor for me and Edur, who couldn't be here, to have these two great speakers tonight to discuss the book.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming to have this conversation tonight, because it really is a conversation about perhaps one of the most important things we have to figure out is how to make the world different. And the realization that it's not new, but that we're never going to do that in our own country by ourselves is probably one of the most important realizations you have to come to if you actually want to be part of changing the planet. And so I've never really done a book review in public like this, but I'll try. And I was glad to see this, and I was thinking about this because Ralph Maurer came to me 10, 15 years ago and said, Jim, you have to do a book on the NAFTA agreement. And this was the book that turned out at the end of that, which was actually looking at this. The progression through this book was the same as the progression through this book. We sort of came to the same conclusions, only this was much later, had way more evidence in it. But the thoughts that were raised here, and this was written by Mexicans, Americans, and Canadians together, were all the same, which was there was nothing in the free trade agreement for ordinary working people. It was simply the entrenchment of corporate power and taking away the fundamental rights of human beings to be in charge of their lives and to make decisions about their lives. The idea that somehow Mexican workers were going to be the huge winners of all this thing, and we would simply be the losers because we were the developed country, was yet one of the great lies being told about these trade agreements that go on. And we continue to fight those today. The first part of the book, I think, is very useful because, as Dick said, the bottom line was that this didn't come out of some textbook somewhere. This came out of a concerted globalization strategy of the corporate sector and the wealthy to rearrange the world again in their image, and to retrench and to roll back conditions in some countries that they felt were completely unreasonable, and to destroy workers' power in those countries, at the same time use the international arena to develop production relationships based on extreme exploitation. And I will make this point, and I think the book's a bit weak on this, it's not just the exploitation of workers that are the issue, it's also the exploitation of the environment. I want to come back to that for a second later on. But the first part of the book is very interesting because, well, it was different in each country. As the book points out, the basic thrust was the same. Change the state from being proactive and invading the economy, becoming part of the economy, and turn it to the other side where the state is now submissive to bodies outside their control, international bodies controlled basically by corporations, including tribunals, the GATT, and then the free trade panels, and to take the decision-making away from the state itself and from people in those communities and from democracy, basically. And that what the book does a very good job, I think, of really analyzing that in the three countries. Because what's clear is, well, the goal was the same. The process for getting there was different in each country. There were similarities, absolutely, but the situation is different. I think that's important for us to understand when we talk about this, that going forward, as we build more solidarity with these with countries around the world, that it's not just understanding how they're exploited, it's understanding who they are and where they came from and what is their history and what is their project. Because it's not just worldwide now, not everybody's an international proletariat. We have to create that, but only on the understanding that we have to start where people are at. And that's one of the challenges I think we have to reach in this book. One of the things the book points out, which I think is very important to us, and certainly goes right back to when I walked my first demonstration against the coup in Chile on September 12th, 1973, was that we need to continue. And what was the threat of Allende in those days? His threat was that he was creating a form of socialism and a peaceful road to socialism in Chile. And that threat caused the most massive outcry in the United States until there was a military coup that destroyed 15,000 people and set back that whole country for 25 years of torture. And one of the challenges I think that we've had developed more and more over the years, and I think it's continuing to be a challenge for the labor movement particularly, is as we try to develop the future vision, the left's project on what is going to replace capitalism becomes more vague. And that we need to be thinking more and more. We need intellectuals to think more. We need workers to think, what is the alternative? And I know at one point, I think the left had very clear alternatives. Certainly when I was growing up, there was a very clear prescription for how we were going to move to a socialist system, and that was going to be the way we go. We had fights, of course, great sectarian fights about how we were going to get there, but generally people felt that was the process of going forward. Today, I think that the left worldwide is challenged to find a global answer that's also applicable to your conditions in your own country, your own communities, that ties together to give us that vision again, so we can defeat the vision that basically says there is no alternative, which is really what people believe today. If you don't play by the rules, you can't win, and it's a race to the bottom. Because that's really what they're offering us, is a race to the bottom. And we really need to deal with that problem. The other thing that the book challenges us to do, and I think it's a fair challenge, is to go beyond crisis solidarity, which is a lot of what we've done over the years, and I've certainly been part of it myself, is that when there is a crisis and people ask for help, well, we do whatever we can to help them. That's our job. And so however those things come to our attention, we do what we can to show that solidarity, and that's very important. But the book says clearly that challenging the crisis is true, but the real solution has to be long-term. That it's about relationship building and understanding that doesn't come from writing a telegram of solidarity with some folks you never met before and potentially will never meet again. That the real solutions come from building institutions, including through the labor movement, and Napoleon will speak about his relationship around that, but long-term relationships with people in other countries that require learning on both sides to discover each other's strengths. I mean, this idea that somehow us in the North have the answers and the people in the South don't, and that we're there to give them charity so that we can help them in solidarity is the most absurd thing I've ever seen in my whole life, and it doesn't fit any of my own personal experience. The fact is the inspiration, vision of people in the southern half of this planet is actually far ahead of us in many ways, and they've done far more creative things than we have over the years to change their lives and have a collective vision for the world. And so part of this is developing those relationships, which I think we struggle with at times. And I will say, in my life in the labor movement, we've come a long way from letting the CLC run international affairs along with CETA and the export development corporations to actually having a much more profound and more longer-term view of it, union by union, and even at the CLC at this point, to develop those long-term relationships. The other point that we need to struggle with is that there is a contradiction here, or a challenge, I think, that I've always wondered about, I've always said we need the biggest borders in the world against capitalism and the smallest borders in the world for socialism or for building a new kind of world, right? But to suggest that we're now in this borderless world is a fallacy. It's a political fallacy because we're not in borderless worlds. We have borders still. We have countries, and part of the way forward is to build stronger countries with stronger links to other countries around the world that do this, as we've seen. And we've seen some models for that, frankly, and I will say that, you know, if you look at when the Europeans decided to do free trade, they called it the community and set up much deeper and more profound social standards for the relationship between the countries and a much more profound relationship to each other. And in the labor movement, my experience over there is that they have, they have their national borders, they understand that, but they're building a labor movement amongst themselves that will hopefully move the standards up for everybody. But they created a political structure that reflected that. When we did North American free trade, there was no political structure created where working people in all countries could have a say in how we're going to have those relationships. In fact, what was taken away was the power we had in our own states to have those relationships. So it was the exact opposite. Whereas in Europe, there are lots of issues over there, obviously, with austerity and all of those things. The whole struggle of Greece now and all those things have to be, we have to be part of those too. But they did create a parliamentary structure where these things are debated and where people have some access to those decision-making. And I think that's really fundamental. So that question of how we build a project in Canada and how we build solidarity and how we transform the labor movement here is about, frankly, getting state power back in this province, getting power back so we can make decisions, including changing our relationships to other sovereign countries and to workers around the world. And, we've always tried to do that, but that's been our challenge. And I think if we don't figure that out, then we won't be able to be successful at changing our relationships to other people around the world if we can't change that in our own country. And that's really, really important. And my dream, of course, is that for the labor movement, that political part is just as important. And I've always said the two most precious things working class people have is their right to organize and to represent themselves collectively with their employers and to demand their share of the wealth. The other most important thing they have is democracy. Because for working class people, democracy is the other half of the equation. You can't have a strong union movement and a union movement that's going to function and represent you democratically and have rights in a country that has no democracy. And yet we don't exercise our power in a democratic way in ways in which I think are that effective, and we have to learn how to do that. So those two things come together, and we together go forward building up the power that way. The second thing I'd say is that around that idea is that solidarity, whether it's inside our borders or outside our borders, has to become a higher level of support and work commitment and acceptance within the labor movement overall. And that's been our challenge for years, and I think we've done a fairly good job on the left of raising those issues up and making them more important, and unions are now involved in solidarity work, which 15 years ago had nothing to do with it. And part of that, of course, is making projects and long-term relationships, as we do through CODEV here and through many unions here, with people in other countries that aren't just one-shot deals or ready check and go away. They're about building relationships and getting involved in their lives. And I think we've come some distance to that, but I live for the day when that solidarity work is just as important on the list of things as getting a wage increase or solving the grievance. Because in order to have a vision for the labor movement going forward, that work has to be there. And that extends not just, and I really say this honestly, not just the solidarity between working people who happen to have a union, or fortunate enough to have a union, whatever country they're in. But it's almost as somebody said many years ago, what's necessary on the planet right now is a profound human solidarity between human beings on this planet about the kind of planet they're going to have and how they're going to take it back from the people who have it today and make it a place where everybody has the rights and dignity in wherever they live on the whole planet. I mean, it's not a big job. We should be able to do it by next week if we hurry. But the fact is, this is a process, and I think this book is part of, for me, reading it. It was nice to have time to read a full book, But part of that was, part of this book is really challenging us to say, what does that look like, and how do we answer those challenges that are being presented to us today for working people? Whatever country you live in today, I would say there are profound challenges. And this book helps us to challenge that way of thinking, and that has to be part of our conversation. So I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight, and again, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for being here tonight to have this conversation.
Well, first, thank you very much for the invitation. I really like to congratulate Richard for his work, for his book. Today there are not many books about the labor movement and the role that the unions can play in changing society and trying to be an important factor for progressive transformation towards democracy and social justice. So this is a big effort. I'd like to split my remarks today about the book first and some of the general subjects, and second, my own and personal experience as president of the National Mine and Steelworkers Union of Mexico. First, I think this is a very interesting book, which I think lots of people should read, not only trade unionists. I think it has really an analysis which gives you and understands and gives you the ideas and the elements to understand what is needed and what it has been important in the last few years and in the way of the transformation of society and the globalization of the economy. And I found a very interesting chapter about the NAFTA agreement. 21 years ago, when the NAFTA agreement was signed by the governments of Canada, United States, and Mexico, the promises they made that we were going to increase employment and growth and equality and social justice, after 21 years, we find completely the opposite as the results. And I think it's very well treated in the book, is really the results of 21 years in which we have found that the beneficiaries of this NAFTA agreement were only few multinational companies, and the vast majority of the people have been suffering the consequences of unemployment, insecurity, and the lack of opportunities to really develop and grow in society. And so this is very interesting. What we studied and what we learned from this NAFTA agreement is that it was a failure for the vast majority of the population of Canada, United States, and Mexico. It's a frustration that we really create so many expectancies about what was going to happen, and finally the results are completely opposed to what they promised to us. And secondly, now that they want to introduce a new trade agreement, the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement, I think it's going to be worse because it's just an interest of the big multinational companies also to develop the commercial and department stores to stop China to invade these 12 countries that are going to sign. They have kept the governments of the countries, Mexico included, United States and Canada, involved in this Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement, in which they have kept in secret what they're going to sign. And they're going to do like a fast-track approval of this and the signing of this agreement, which is going to affect worse what NAFTA has brought to us. More inequality, more injustices, more exploitation of the natural resources and of the labor force of the people and of our countries. So I think we have to be we have to be aware of what they're trying to do in order to increase inequality and to have the few beneficiaries out of this trade agreement. I also found very interesting the comparison they make on the role of some specific unions and who have been trying to fight against globalization and all these efforts that unfortunately haven't been very successful. I think we are one of the few cases of success, and I will explain why in this struggle for social justice and democracy and freedom for trade unions. But so the book is very interesting, Richard. I really congratulate you, and I think we should continue and work together in more and more development, more ideas, with more experiences, with more information. And I think everybody will benefit in our countries from all this knowledge and experience that you share in this book for everybody. And the other important aspect that I want to mention is that they speak very much about he and Edur about the solidarity, the role that solidarity can play. And I can tell you, because according to our experience, that solidarity works. And it works inside the country, in trade unions, and international as well. And we are a case of this in which we can prove the struggle of the mine union of Mexico is a very clear example of this. I will change to this and then go back to the book again. 11 years ago, I met the international president of the United Steelworkers in Phoenix, Arizona, Leo Gerard. And we had a 3-hour meeting and discussion, a private discussion, about how we saw the future of the trade unions, and the role we had been playing in order to prepare to fight against globalization. And we came to the conclusion that if the companies were globalizing to maximize their profits and the exploitation of national resources of the countries, the trade unions, we should also globalize our activities and our strategies, because otherwise, in 10 years, we were going to disappear. And this is the tendency. I mean, the multinational companies have been trying to create outsourcing companies to promote all these. Even in our country, we have protection contracts in which is to protect the interests of the companies. And most of the traditional unions have signed this with the companies. We are one of the few that we haven't in the Mine and Steelworkers Union of Mexico. And this is probably why they focus on our union. We're a very independent and democratic union. And we are the largest private industrial sector union in Mexico. We have 250,000 members at the national level. But when they launched this attack in 2006, it's because they were preparing to destroy the unions, the democratic unions of Mexico. They don't want and they don't accept in a country in which the system of corruption has grown so much and so fast that it has become a real threat for the working class and the middle class of our country. And this is important because we decided to challenge all these companies and governments. And when they launched this attack, and I personally received death threats and all kind of threats, and my colleagues, they froze our accounts in the union, and the personal accounts and the union accounts. They tried to impose, puppets just to serve their interests. They tried to destroy and really asphyxiate financially our union. So we decided to resist, because if they went over our union, they were going to destroy any other unions in Mexico. So we started this resistance movement in 2006. I had to leave the country. I had to come to Canada. Along this process, just to mention for some of you who haven't known the story, and 4 of our members have been killed. More than 100 have seriously injured, by shotguns and the police forces and the paramilitary groups of the companies. Our main enemies happen to be the 3 biggest mining groups of Mexico, which are the three richest men of Mexico. Carlos Slim, number 2 in the world today, which owns the Grupo Frisco. Larrea from Grupo Mexico, who owns Azarco, the American Smelting and Refining Company, and Southern Peru Copper Corporation, and Grupo Peñoles. So they are the number 1, number 2, and number 3 richest men of Mexico. These are our enemies. And we decided to fight against them. And so they launched a huge smear campaign. They control the media, they control the government, they sponsor and the political campaigns of the governments. So they have all the control in the judiciary system. And they launched 11 false accusations against me and some of my colleagues. It took us almost eight and a half years to dismiss one and cancel one by one of them through different tribunals and the Supreme Court of Justice. Last August was the last one of the 11. And the Supreme Court of Justice had a resolution in our favor, a unanimous resolution. It was a historic this resolution on the 28th of August, in which they canceled all the accusations, declared that they were unconstitutional. They were motivated by political persecution. And they also launched, with Interpol, red alerts. So I had to be locked in Canada. I couldn't travel abroad. Now I've been traveling a lot since then. And unfortunately, also we and my wife became Canadian citizens, so we have dual nationality. But I'm a really unique case because I've been presiding my union from Canada for the last 9 years. I've been reelected 6 times unanimously in different conventions along these 9 years, and we really succeed in all these legal and long and battle against all these companies and governments. So I feel very proud about that. It became a big victory for our struggle. They are morally defeated. Even if they are the richest men, they are just based on concessions and exploitation of the natural resources of Mexico. We just found 2 weeks ago, a recent report. It's an official report in which the companies, they operate through concessions in the mining industry. They gave them concessions to exploit certain parts of the national territory. Today, they have almost half of the national territory given to all these companies, domestic and foreign companies, in concessions. By the way, many Canadians, because in mining, 70% of the mining companies for foreign investment in mining is Canadian. And all these big groups, so they own almost half of the territory. I mean, it's amazing. And the government doesn't have the power and the political will to change this, because concession, I mean, the land and the natural resources of Mexico, according to the Constitution, belong to the Mexican people. Everything which is below the earth belongs to the nation. And they just give concessions to exploit it for 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, whatever. And they used to be in a minority concessions for exploitation associated to domestic or national investors. Now they can own 100%. They used to have restrictions not to go close to the beaches or whatever. Now they can go and own whatever. And many of these concessions, they don't end in industrial projects of exploitation or the mining or creating of the mining activities or the minerals. They are converted into resorts, casinos, whatever. I mean, this is really is the system of corruption that is working. So when we decided to fight, it was not only against our rights, the rights of the workers, the labor rights and the human rights, but also against all this system of corruption and exploitation. And I feel very proud that we have succeeded. And along this way, we became, we work and became and create programs of a strong solidarity with most of the Canadian labor unions. Jim Sinclair, of course, was one of the examples in BC, but also the Canadian Labor Congress, and also in the United States. And we receive a lot of support, and even from the NDP, and Jack Layton, and sometimes he went to visit Mexico, presiding a delegation of more than 50 members, international union leaders and members of parliament from England, from Canada, and he was very strong supporter of our struggle in 2009. But unfortunately, the corruption continued. We were under the conservative governments, very close related to the Bush administration at that time. So they didn't want to change things. But anyway, we have worked really closely with the labor movement in Canada and United States. We have worked also very closely with the international organizations. There is one which we created almost 3 years ago, Industrial Global Union, which has a representation of more than 50 million members worldwide. I was elected as one of the members of the executive committee at the international level. And all this solidarity has worked. Industrial is called Industrial Global Union, and it's composed of more than from unions from more than 140 countries, and there are more than 50 million members at the international level. So they have also provided with a lot of support and solidarity. But solidarity, when I say it works, it not only works in support of our struggle. It's also from us to them. In 2005, I'll give you just 2 examples. In 2005, the United Steelworkers the International Union from the United States and Canada, were having a big problem with Group of Mexico, this multinational company, the biggest mining group of Mexico, with ASARCO, the American smelting and refining company in Arizona and Texas. And they were trying to take away all the benefits and cancel the rights of the workers to negotiate and organize. And we have also in Mexico relations with this company. So we decided to strike and support and demonstrate against Group of Mexico in solidarity with the workers from the United States. I remember at some stage we had a press conference, we rallied in Mexico, and the journalists were asking me, why are you supporting the gringos? I said, I'm not supporting the gringos, I'm supporting democracy and social justice and labor rights and human rights. And last week, they had a problem with Crown Industries, this group, in which they have been on a strike in Ontario for more than a year and a half. And the board of directors of this company, multinational company, was going to have a meeting in Monterrey, Mexico, which is, by the way, it happens to be my hometown in Monterrey, the industrial city. So they asked us for support to demonstrate against the company because they haven't shown any will or any sensitiveness for have a resolution for this strike, this unfair strike against the workers of the members of the United Steel Workers. And we demonstrated last week in Monterrey against the company. They were really very, very anxious and very nervous. They were very tense. And this was an act of solidarity of us in Mexico in support of the United Steel Workers, same as they have done a lot for us. And we signed in 2005 a strategic alliance between the United Steelworkers and Los Mineros, as they call us, the National Mine and Metal Workers of Mexico and the Steelworkers. And then we have continued on this process of integration. We are working together with Unite from England and in a group called Workers Uniting from Ireland, England, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Mexico, and of course, the United States and Canada. And so solidarity has worked, has put a stop to all these abuses and corruption up to a certain point, but it's a day-to-day struggle. And but at least we feel, working together that we have much more power. I mean, unity gives the strength and the power to change and transform things, and we have proved and shown that internationally in our own countries. So I think this is important, what we have achieved. And so our struggle has been very important because it became an international struggle. And along these 9 years, we have got the highest wage and benefit increases for the mine and steel workers of Mexico, 3 and 4 times above the national average of the rest of the unions from Canada. Negotiating from Canada. We have organized in the last 2 years more than 20,000 new members, in spite of all the opposition from the government and the companies, because of course they prefer, the traditional unions, or they prefer to have no unions at all, or outsourcing companies. So this is something that we feel very proud, and for our alliances that we have created internationally, but also all the work that we have done domestically in Mexico. And so just like to say that I don't want to take all the time of you, but I wrote a book which has all this story, which is called Collapse of Dignity. And Collapse of Dignity tells all the story of this aggression and corruption that prevails in Mexico against the working class, against not only our union, but against the working class. And I think has become an example. I feel very proud that it became a New York Times bestseller book, thanks to the solidarity and support of many trade unionists from all over the world, and also from the USA Today became a bestseller. And I think these stories that it can help us to learn more about one of each other and the problems that we face on the daily basis. Exploitation is of natural resources and of a labor force is an international objective of all these multinational companies and to destroy unions, democratic unions as well. So we have to stand together and fight back, and as we have done, and many other unions in the world. So I feel very proud that many of the issues in this book, coming back to the book, I think are very important, because everybody can understand that if we don't really stand up and fight back, it's going to be very difficult to win and be successful in any struggle. I remember a phrase from Leo Gerard, my dear friend of the President of the United Steelworkers. He says, if you don't fight, if you don't fight, you are going to lose. But if you fight, I don't guarantee that you're going to lose, but most probably you will be defeated. So you don't do anything. So let's work together, and this is something important. So these books, and we have to write more of our experiences. Jim, all these that we have learned, and unfortunately many union leaders, when they retire, I mean, probably they will go and enjoy their families, which they deserve, or play golf or whatever they deserve to that. But I think it will be very important to have really all this experience and background written or being published in books or in documentary films or interviews or whatever. I think it's very important not to lose for the new generations and the future young leaders that are preparing themselves to learn from the experiences that we have faced along our lives. So congratulations, Richard. It's a fantastic book, and I hope that we'll be waiting another book or a new edition or whatever. Okay, and thank you very much for this time. I'm open to any questions, same as Jim or Richard, of course. And thank you very much for the time and for the invitation to be here. Thank you.
Jim and Napoleon covered some of the key issues in the book and carried some of the discussion even further. I'd like to talk about two aspects only of the book that weren't mentioned. One is one of the unusual perspectives, perhaps, of the book is the recognition in the middle section of the two binationalisms, as we call it, of the North American working class. Two unconnected binational. They're connected, but they're not really connected. One is the fact that the Mexican working class is a binational class. A large part of the Mexican working class works part of the time or much of the time in the U.S. They're linked by family relations to the working class in Mexico. When Edur and I, way back, started to write a book about the Mexican working class, we started to write about within Mexico. And we quickly realized that you can't do that, because the Mexican working class straddles the border. And there's all kinds of interconnectedness. I mean, you're a new special straddling of the border. In fact, 3 borders. But the Mexican working class is a binational working class. And even that part of the Mexican working class now, a large part of it that's in Mexico, in the maquilas, in the border regions, works as part of continentally integrated production. So the Mexican working class exists in 2 labor markets, 2 societies, in 2 states. Then there is another aspect of binationalism that is that between the U.S. and Canada. And in the 70s, this was considered a very reactionary phenomenon when I first came to Canada from the U.S., and that is international unions, which refer to Canada-U.S. unions, basically. And they were considered reactionary by some sectors of Canadian unionism for some good reasons. One is they often had more conservative bargaining strategies than the U.S. counterparts. That was true in auto. And another reason was that at that time, the AFL-CIO was really in bed with the State Department of the U.S. and carrying out very conservative policies, or worse, worldwide. But what we argue is that these international binational unions, Canada-U.S., or you could say trinational if you include Quebec. These binational, trinational unions, some of their membership in the U.S. And a growing number of their membership are Mexicans, Latinos, immigrants, etc. So what we argue is that there's a potential synergy between the binational character of the Mexican working class and the existence of binational international unions, and that this could give energy, renewed energy to the labor movement. It could. It really depends on what the labor movement does to deal with non-unionized workers, immigrants, and so on. And so that's one point I wanted to make. Napoleon talked about the solidarity efforts between the steel workers and the los mineros. And those are the really, it seemed to us, and I have a question for Napoleon, it seemed to us that that was probably the most potentially exciting alliance, because they talked about, I don't know if it's still a living project, possibly forming a common union, a continental union. There would be all kinds of issues in forming it, but it would be an incredible step towards acting in unison and solidarity. It would have all the problems that any union does, in different locations, how to meld interests together, and how not to be in competition. But it would bring Mexico, which is still an authoritarian and violent state, into really more into the North American struggle. And I think there are other solidarity things that are very important, but don't have so far the same organic potential, I think. And that is the work that goes on between the teachers of the three countries in the, what is it called? The Alliance to Defend Public Education. That involves the BC Teachers Federation, plays a very important role in that. The dissident sections of the Teachers Union in Mexico, and more and more unions, teachers unions in the U.S. The U.S. hadn't played much of a role, but now Chicago, Milwaukee, Los Angeles. So that's another arena of common effort. The other point, I think these are seeds of continental struggle, of continental class solidarity that's necessary for an effective fight back. The other thing I want to mention just very, very briefly is that while the United States and Canada are stable capitalist democracies, with all the limitations of capitalist domination, manipulation of the media, and all of that, Mexico is neither stable nor a democracy. Mexico is a little hard to characterize now, because, as Napoleon points out in his book, what was supposed to be the democratic transition in the last couple of decades has really been more the rise of the power of big Mexican capital. Mexico is not a puppet of the U.S., but the Mexican government is more and more directly controlled by the people that Napoleon spoke about, the big business in Mexico, who themselves, are international actors. One of the biggest cement companies in the world, Carlos Slim, second richest man in the world, not only owns many Mexican mines and the Mexican telephone system, other telephone systems, he is owner now of 15 or 20% of the New York Times. So these are international actors that play important roles. Mexico is in a process that's very hard to describe, but if implosion or explosion, both mixed together. The level of violence is incredible. The over 100,000 disappeared missing people in the last 6-8 years. 30,000 killed people. The recent massacre last September 26th of the student teachers in Guerrero is one example of many killings like that. In the previous June, the Army executed 22 young people in the state of Mexico and covered it up, and then finally the truth came out. So in terms of solidarity, we have to remember that we're dealing with two countries with, quote, if we could use the normal capitalist domination, very conservative, very repressive of labor rights, things are going backwards. But we're dealing with another country where there's very little rule of law. There's some elements of that, some of the court decisions that overturned others. But they could just bring up false charges again and again and imprison people indefinitely. So the struggle in Mexico for union rights is inseparably intertwined with the struggle for political democracy. And it takes place in the context of a violent war within the drug state complex. It's not a war against the drug cartels, because the drug cartels are very fused in complex ways with the governments at different levels. But it's a struggle within the cartel state complexes for power and money. And it also has provided a cover for the renewal of the dirty war of the 70s, which was counterinsurgency, aided and abetted by the United States, to destroy resistance to neoliberal transformation. And the tremendous neoliberal transformation that has been intensified by Peña Nieto, the new president in 2012, which will give even more rights over oil to foreign companies, more rights, more concessions over mining, is really a direct attack on the people of Mexico in many ways. One of the ways is that people are being forced off their lands for mining and other developments. But the people in Mexico have a historic tradition of resistance. Mexican Revolution still is alive in popular culture, and there's tremendous resistance to the neoliberal assault. And to deal with this resistance, and given the policy of keeping wages and workers' rights down, means repression. And the drug wars provided a very convenient cover for carrying out massive repression against the population. So Mexico is in a very tough situation, and Mexican labor movement needs to be revived, and I know the miners' union has been trying to do that. I know you've been doing some organizing in at least one or some of the maquilas, where they mainly have fake unions. But it's taking place under conditions of tremendous repression. And so just in closing, I just want to say that the floor will be open for questions. It's a sort of anticlimactic remark. I couldn't think of a dynamite remark. But anyway, the floor is open to questions to any of the speakers.